Greetings, mortals! It is I, Remortis, and today we are going to be updating a long-awaited build for Rogue Trader, and that will be the Officer Vanguard Commissar. So over the course of this past weekend was Rogue Trader's anniversary, and I had the opportunity to dish out some Rogue Trader codes, and I had a lot of fun with all of you this weekend. Probably had a good amount of viewers and such. Several of you got free copies of Rogue Trader. And while we were playing, some people asked me to just show me the updated guide for this Commissar build, and I went ahead and did it. And we went and tested it out and did some things, and it actually performed pretty decently. It's still not to the effect that I would like it to be, but it didn't perform too awfully either. So if you really still wanted to do an Officer Commissar build with the Vanguard leniency or towards a Tanky Commissar, then, well, let's go ahead and check out what we have to offer here. All right, so for this character, for the Commissar, there are a few different homeworlds we can go, but before we begin, let's go ahead and just, grab the origin so we can get our nice fancy outfit. We don't want to just be in our skivvies the whole time. All right, so there are three main ways, I think, that you can build a Officer Commissar or just a Commissar Vanguard build in general. Let's start off with the Officer side of things, and I think if you just go like a pure support Officer type build, I think Imperial World is the best way to go, but if you are going to go Officer into Vanguard, I would highly suggest going Death World or Forge World. But before we get into all that, let's talk about the Imperial World and why I think it makes a really good officer. All right, so just by itself, you get Humanity's Finest, which gives you a plus 10 in any stat. So obviously, if we're playing an officer, we're going to want to max out our fellowship, which can be pretty solid to have. But then as for our talents, we have Ready to Serve here. When an Imperial World character is affected by an ally's non-damaging ability, or it affects an ally which is with such an ability, their resolve is increased based on your fellowship. And that's really the main reason why you would pick playing an officer with the Imperial World background here. This talent alone is really good to help increase resolve and get those momentum rising, so you can just keep pumping out those ultimates and just obliterating the battlefield. Doing My Part is actually a pretty relevant talent that you might consider here. If you're not running any other officers besides your Commissar, could be quite useful since it can reduce the AP cost of your archetypes, your unique archetypes in your party. So if you're playing as an Officer Master Tactician, for example, this will give you -1 AP to each of those if you have no other Officers or Master Tacticians, for example. No Heresy is actually a very flavorful talent, but beware, if you do pick this, you cannot invest any points into Lore Xenos or Lore Warp, meaning you won't be able to use any you won't be able to use any Xeno weapons. But you're a Commissar. Who would need such heresy? No, none of it. And then you get Stronger Together, which is just another +5 to whatever your stat is. And then there are several Imperial World characters in your game from your other companions, and all of them will be able to increase +5 to whatever their stat is. So Imperial World is a pretty solid way to go. However, since we're going to be considering playing a Vanguard here, we're going to need all the tankiness we can get, since we will not be playing as a Warrior. However, I think the best version of this build is probably going Warrior into Vanguard to be even more tankier and deal a little bit more damage. But the Officer side of things can actually hold its own pretty well. So play how you desire. But the reason I think Forge World and Death World are so good is because they have a few talents here. So let's start off with the Death World. So Death World's really nice because you get Survival Instinct. Once per combat, whenever your health drops below 30%, you get a 20% health shield, which is pretty nice. But beyond that, Death World characters will also gain a flat 20% dodge and armor while you have at least one temporary wound from any source. So this is fantastic for the Vanguard, since we'll have plenty of ways to get temporary hit points through that, as well as some stuff you can provide from the Officer too. But I think the Death World Warrior Vanguard is probably the best way to go for this ultimate tank, so to speak, since you can just get tons of different sources of temporary wounds and also a bunch of other goodies that the Warrior has to offer. We'll definitely do an updated version of the Death World Warrior Vanguard at a later point, but we're going to wait for patch 1.3 as well as the new DLC to come out. All right, another thing to consider for this build, for why you want to pick this for being a tank, we got Wounded Beast here. Whenever you have any injuries, you can get some agility willpower. That's not too relevant to our build. Really, we're going to be looking at Tenacity here and Lifetime of Scars. So Lifetime of Scars will just get you a flat, essentially it's basically extra deflection against fire, toxic, and bleeding effects, which is pretty handy. This is obviously a lot more relevant on other builds, such as the Executioners or the self-inflicting or the self-immolation Pyromancer builds. But hey, being able to reduce your damage from fire, toxic, and bleeding is always pretty nice. And then Tenacity is a fantastic talent. Once per combat, when a Death World character suffers from stunned, blinded, or immobilized, they just straight up ignore it. And instead, we'll get a bonus to their, like a temporary hit point shield. Pretty nice. So Death World's a really good way to go for your character. And obviously, if you really want to live out some of your other Commissar fantasies, such as being Yarick or Kaifas Kane, Death World's probably the way to go. Although I'm not really entirely sure if Kaifas Kane was a Death World, but I'm pretty sure Yarick was. Anyways, Death World, pretty good way to go for your Commissar. Hive World on paper might look the initial way you want to go. It's kind of lackluster compared to the other two, because it doesn't really offer you too much in the ways to make your character really excel in either tankiness or just, being a support character. You get some minor buffs here for having allies or enemies nearby. You get a little bit of extra resolve. Okay, it's not too shabby. Camaraderie here, we get a little bit. You can change you can pass willpower resistance tests with your fellowship, and our fellowship will be pretty high with this build. Outnumber, you can get basically double the effect of melee superiority, which could be actually pretty impactful. It's depending if you're using a lot of melee characters, that is. Weapon personalization is also pretty good, but it's just very minor buffs here. Whenever using ranged weapons, you'll get a little bit of extra damage, a little bit of armor pen, a little bit less recoil, and a little bit more rate of fire. Very minor. Helping Hand here, you can get a little bit of extra movement by just standing next to people, which actually is relevant to the Commissar as well as being our officer. And then Fresh Start, I don't even want to talk about this talent. It's not really worth it. Never pick it. So with Hive World, if you really want to go that route, you could, if you so desire, but I would typically try to avoid playing as a Hive World character. Now moving on to what I think is going to be the best homeworld to pick would be the Forge World. And why is that? Well, you guys probably know me by now. You get 3 different features to upgrade from being a Forge World character. And the ones that we're going to be looking at here are Locomotion System and Subskin Armor. Never take Analytic System. It is a trap because eventually you will hit a crit hit chance cap. And we're not really worried about critical hit chance on this character anyway, so don't even worry about it. Locomotion System is really good for many Forge World characters, but we're not going to be really worried about this one. But it does give you tons of dodge and movement points based on our agility rating. But the one we're going to be looking at here is Subskin Armor, just to get straight up extra armor from having our toughness really high. And our main stats are going to be Fellowship and Toughness, so this is very impactful for us. But beyond that, we got some other goodies here. We got Fires of the Forge, similarly to the Death World character. You'll be able to have resistance to burning and fire damage, which is pretty handy. As you can see here, we also get resistance to flame weapons, whereas the Death World can get resistance to poison and bleeding effects, so like the dots. This can help you prevent just straight up, somebody burning with the flamethrower. Not too shabby. Pinnacle of Weaponry here can actually give you a little bit of flavors if you want to try to be doing that one-hand pistol and one-handed power sword option here. You can do Pinnacle of Weaponry to go ahead and increase the damage you deal based on your intellect bonus. We get a little bit of bonuses to our intellect passively through our officer stuff and from our starting stats. It's not too crazy of a talent, but it's still pretty nice to have just a little bit of that little extra damage if you so desire. But the main reason we're here is for Steel of the Forge. Probably one of the best homeworld talents in the entire game. While you're wearing heavy armor, which we will, we'll be getting an additional movement point, deflection, and more importantly, prone immunity, which is fantastic. Prone is probably the most debilitating debuff in the entire game. It's basically a stun, but worse because you have a minus 30% penalty to dodge and parry since you're going to be literally lying on the ground. And by having this talent, you'll be immune to it as long as you're wearing heavy armor. So it's really good to have. And you can also do some shenanigans here by using intelligence instead of fellowship for your skill checks, but we're not going to be doing that because we need to have our fellowship for other things. Now, if this flat out just replaced your fellowship with intellect, similarly to how the Voidborn does it with Be Smart, we probably would consider that, but no, we're really just here for Pinnacle of Weaponry, Steel Forge, and Fires of the Forge. But really, we're just here for Steel of the Forge, if we're completely honest with ourselves. Oh, and the Subskin Armor. So we're going to go out to that option. Obviously, we're going to be picking as a Commissar here. I guess we'll cover the ability and the talents that the Commissar will provide you to kind of give you an idea of how the character is going to work. So our main feature is called At All Costs. It's a once per combat ability, which will make your next single shot from like a pistol or rifle or whatever it is you have, or a melee attack. And if you can hit either an ally or an enemy with this. If you hit an enemy, the target will become marked, and any ally who kills the marked target will gain an additional turn after the current one with an additional +2 AP and MP. So if you mark a target for, say, somebody like Juliet, Cabela, or Argenta, or whoever, they'll get an extra turn to keep causing more mayhem. But then alternatively, you can also decide to shoot an ally. And it'll give all of your allies an additional AP and MP. But just be aware, if you are shooting your ally, try to use a weaker gun or a weaker weapon so you don't, end up brutally maiming your ally and potentially costing your fight. So just keep that in mind. As you can see, we also get a little bit extra bonuses to Fellowship, Weapon Skill, Coercion, even more Coercion down here. And then we can look at our talents. So talents, we have Duty and Honor. While the Commissar's allies under the effects of at all costs, the ally will suffer extra damage, but will gain extra AP and MP. I don't really worry about this too much because it's only once per turn, and I feel like there are other talents that you can consider. But it's not a bad one. If you feel like you end up using that ability a lot more often, obviously use it only once per turn, but if you feel like you rely on it a lot, then this might have more value for you. Show Them Contempt is a really good talent for this build since we're going to be up in melee. This will allow you to just straight up get extra resolve based on your Fellowship bonus. Pretty nice to have for free resolve. Then we got Motivation. Anytime the Commissar grants additional movement points to an ally character, they will gain 2 more on top of that. Pretty cool. Especially since we're an officer and we have plenty of ways to help give people more movement points, such as the talent Move, and some of the other passive talents that we have at our disposal. All right, then we have another talent called Summary Execution, which allows us to use the Summary Execution ability, the at all costs ability, one more time if we actually kill the enemy with it. So that's just a nice way to get, an extra attack, so to speak. And then lastly, we have For the Emperor. When momentum is less than 100 points, at all costs will grant extra momentum upon killing the marked enemy or targeting an ally. This can be quite useful for you. I feel like I value this more if you're playing a Officer Master Tactician, but this could still be useful in any build for the most part. But yeah, that's the Commissar in a nutshell. Not to mention you get a really sweet outfit. As for what triumphs and darkest hours you want to pick up, we want to make sure we have as much coercion as possible because A, we're a Commissar, and B, there's a really powerful armor in the game that needs high coercion. But of course, you can just pick whatever you feel like is best suited to your character because this is all really flavor. You lose the game because you have a -5 or a +5 to coercion. And then as for the ones you want to get a Darkest Hour under penalty for, I would just suggest really anything that's not the Persuasion. So either pick up the Grim Portents for less awareness or less athletics. I don't believe there's any time really where you are by yourself and the athletics comes to play. So I'd probably end up going with that one. All right, so and as for this build, for this video today, we're going to be going with the Officer into Vanguard, so we'll be starting off as an Officer. And moving on to our stats, we're going to do a simple increase of +10 into our Strength, so we can get up to 45 as soon as possible, so that we can wear that heavy armor. And then we rounded up our Toughness and Intelligence by 5 each, because even numbers are best. And then we maxed out our Fellowship, because that's going to be our main stat, followed by Toughness. And then there you go. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the rest of the build. Continuing on with our build, we will be increasing our Coercion as our main stat, and then you can decide to choose increasing your Persuasion, Commerce, or Lore Imperium, or Carouse. I went with Carouse just in case it does come up. It doesn't come up that often, honestly. But the main one you absolutely must have is Coercion. Everything else is just whatever you prefer. At level 3, we will get our Bring It Down ability, which is obviously the best ability the Officer has to offer. Gives it your ally an extra turn. Yada yada. And moving on to level 4, we get our ultimate, which is also a fantastic ultimate. You give an ally an extra turn with full AP and MP, and they can make multiple attacks. And there's a way to get even more attacks, depending on the builds of those characters. And just as any other officer build, the very first talent we're going to pick up at level 4 is Lasting Impression. This will allow us to have our allies retain half of the voice of command bonus until the end of combat. But more importantly, you can use that to allow your characters to continue being buffed, even if they're far away. So say if you used Voice of Command on Cabela, or Abelard, or Argenta even, or whoever else, and they end up running off away from your officer, you can still keep buffing them with your other goodies. On to level 5, we'll be increasing our Fellowship, and that'll be our main primary stat, is increasing Fellowship, followed by Toughness, and then Weapon Skill eventually. Also at level 5, we'll be getting our first common talent, and because we are trying to be going as a tank officer, we're going to try to be up as close as possible, and by doing so, while the Commissar is adjacent to an enemy, all their allies will gain +4 resolve. Not too shabby for a free point there. Surely you can pick other things there as well, such as getting a passive increase to your strength, because we need to have at least a 45 strength to get heavy armor, and then which we can then combo with the Forge World talent to get prone immunity. But I went with this because I knew that I'm making a mercenary at this point. So again, if you want to really get that heavy armor early, like you should in Act 1, you definitely want to pick up that character point down here to get your increased strength to 45. All right, following that level 6, we're going to get the Officer talent, Decisive Response. It's a really good talent for the very first turn of the game. Whenever the officer uses the voice of command or bring it down for the first time in combat, the ability costs 1 AP less. That way you can do a little bit more setup and not run out of AP. Following that, we'll increase our fellowship once more. And for this build, because we are going to be up in the melee, I really like the idea of buffing your other melee characters. So ideally, you'll be playing as a dogmatic run for this Commissar, since you know that's on theme. Therefore, we'll be mainly focusing on buffing Heinrich, Cabela, Argenta, and Ulfar. You can obviously bring Abelard with you, but he might end up being redundant, unless you decide to make him an Arc Militant or something else instead of being in a Vanguard. Either way, I really like the idea of having your Commissar up on the front lines and buffing up your other melee characters. Therefore, we're going to be picking up Break Their Ranks here. Obviously, if you feel like you're going to just focus on Argenta or another range character, then you want to take aim. Alternatively, you can just take Air of Authority for a neutral spell. That doesn't matter if they're melee or ranged, because more resolve is always nice. Again, that also really works well with Heinrich, because he is also a Sanctic Psyker, and Sanctic Psykers love having lots of resolve. Anyhow, so we're taking Break the Ranks, and what that will do will cause the ally to increase their melee damage for every melee character near them, which is going to be pretty nice, especially somebody like Cabela who gets in the thick of everything, especially if you use it in tandem with an ability like Move, Move, Move to get them right in the right spot. All right, following that, we're going to take a common feature for Combat Master. Since we're going to be in the melee, we want to make sure that the enemies will no longer be able to get melee superiority against us, which means that if we're surrounded, they get bonus chances to hit you, or at least they get bonuses to weapon skill. So we can negate that by picking up Combat Master. Following that at level 8, we'll be picking up Be Vigilant. This also ties into our kind of push towards being in melee and having melee allies. This is a passive buff, so allies under the effects of any of the officer's abilities will gain a bonus to their weapon skill equal to a number based on your fellowship bonus, and also will deal extra damage on opportunity attacks. And this is actually kind of significant because our Vanguard can trigger a lot of attacks of opportunity for your allies. So this is going to be a really nice ability to have, and as long as you're buffing up your allies and just putting other things on them, you'll be able to get more bang for your buck for this talent. Following that, we'll finish up increasing our coercion, and for our ultimate, there are plenty of really good options here. Option 1, 2, and 4 are good. Option 3 is kind of okay. It's not, in my opinion, probably the weakest of the the weakest of the 4. But pick whichever one you feel is best for you. I personally am a big fan of number 4 and number 1. And for this build, I went with the 4th one first. Because what that'll do, it'll make all of your other non-attacking abilities cost 1 AP less. And in some cases, that means you can just cast all those buffs and setup for free, which is going to be really nice. All right, moving on to level 10. We're going to start increasing our carouse here. Again, doesn't really come up too often, but it potentially can help you out in some situations. However, I don't believe it actually has any impact on combat, unless the carouse can help you negate poison. But it doesn't come up too often, so really, any of these other skill checks are fine. But I didn't have anybody else going to be using this skill check, so this is what we went with. Following that, I decided to increase our weapon skill by 1 here, just so we can round it off. And then we finish out going with toughness for the rest of this archetype. Following that, we will pick up the Leader's Assault Officer talent. Whenever the officer makes an attack, they will gain 5 fellowship to the other combat. So right now, we're not going to be attacking too often, but with the Vanguard levels we're going to be taking, we'll be able to make a lot of counterattacks, and this will be able to help us get extra attacks and get that fellowship sky high. Again, following that, we're going to go ahead and pick up our toughness skill here. Toughness increase. Following that, for our next ability, we're going to take up Move, Move, Move. Probably the best officer ability outside of Bring It Down, which will allow you to give your ally a extra movement turn so they can get them right in the right position or the right angle. Really good ability. Following that, I decided to just go with the Pinnacle of Weaponry here. Ideally, I was going to pick up Plasma at some point. I forgot to do that in this build, but we'll mention that here. So I just did this with the idea of eventually wielding a Plasma Pistol and then also a Power Weapon. Pretty good for us. We're not going to be investing too much in our intelligence, but we can still increase our intelligence through their passive buffs from our other officers. Anyways, if you decided to get the characteristic strength earlier in the archetype level here, instead of picking up Pinnacle of Weaponry here, you could probably pick up Heavy Armor, and then following that, we could pick up the other forgeable talent to give us the prone immunity while wearing Heavy Armor. All right, following that, we're going to pick up Physical Encouragement. Whenever the ally starts a turn, including an extra turn adjacent to the officer, that ally will gain an additional movement points, equal to your fellowship bonus. It's going to be pretty handy. I don't really value this talent too much on most cases, but the Commissar has some other bonuses itself that will combo with this. And then finally, we'll finish up leveling up our Carouse here, as well as our Toughness. And then we pick up the talent Steel the Forge. So if you did replace Pinnacle of Weaponry at level, what is that? 12, you'll be able to pick up Steel of the Forge here. So that way, when you are wearing your Heavy Armor by now, you'll be able to get that extra deflection, movement point, and cannot fall prone, which is actually really important in the early game, as well as the early parts of Act 2. And even though I didn't pick up Heavy Armor just yet, I knew I was going to be picking up it eventually, and I was trying to just squeeze out as much value as I can, since I knew I was going to be making a character in well beyond Act 2. But typically, if you're going to be using a Heavy Armor character, you want to have them wielding Heavy Armor as early as possible, because usually about level 12, 13, 14, 15-ish or so, especially before you fight Aurora, you're going to want that Heavy Armor to be able to withstand some damage. Following that, we're going to pick up our second upgrade to our Finest Hour, and we'll pick the first option to increase damage based on our Fellowship bonus, and we're going to be able to get that really sky high, as mentioned before. All right, and that is our officer levels. Now we're going to move on to our Vanguard. So the Vanguard will be able to get stacks of Unyielding Beacon, which will make it so that whenever they are attacked, they increase their resolve by each stack. All allies can get some of that as well, but then you also get some temporary wounds on top of that, so it's pretty nice. And then there's some other talents that we're going to have that will stem off of that. For our first ability, we're going to go with Defensive Stance here. This will allow us to gain extra parry rating equal to our Unyielding Beacon stacks. And then whenever we do successfully parry an attack, we immediately take an attack for opportunity with a penalty to weapon skill. And we're going to be able to get something to negate that as well. So yeah, Defensive Stance is going to be really nice, and it's going to be what will allow us to deal solid damage here. And then for our first common feature for the Vanguard, I picked up Dueling Mastery for extra parry bonus to help, get more parries and retaliations. Following that, we went with the Vanguard talent, Renitent Beacon. Each stack of Unyielding Beacon will give us an increase to parry and armor. Fantastic. And then following that, we'll have our ultimate upgrade to the Vanguard. Rather, we'll get our ultimate from the Vanguard, Unyielding Guard. Until our next turn, the Vanguard attacks each enemy that attacks the Vanguard's allies in a 3-cell radius around the Vanguard. Additionally, until their next turn, the Vanguard always retaliates when attacked. So I don't use this ultimate too often. However, it is a little bit more valuable than some of the other lame ones, like the Operative. I probably rated like a C+, B- kind of thing. Typically, you want to be using more offensive ultimates. All right, level 20, we get our AP increase, and then we'll, at this point in the build, I decided to increase our strength because I haven't done so yet, so I can pick up Heavy Armor at our next common talent. Otherwise, you can go ahead and increase your Fellowship and Toughness. Like I said, max those out, and then your weapon skill. All right, which we increase our Fellowship in the next level. And then for the other Vanguard talent we're going to be picking up is Enduring Shield. While the Vanguard has at least one temporary wound, they will gain an additional parry and armor equal to their Toughness bonus, which again is one of the many reasons why you want to increase your Toughness. For our next ability, I picked up Follow My Lead. It's a pretty interesting ability, and I never really used it too often before. And on our character, it's going to be very nice because it actually scales off of your Fellowship. So until the start of your next turn, the Vanguard and their allies nearby will gain extra damage and armor penetration against enemies in a 2-cell radius around the Vanguard. Additionally, when this ability is used, all allies in a 2-cell radius around the Vanguard gain the following ability, which costs 0 AP and 2 movement. And until the start of the Vanguard's next turn, and what the following ability does, will allow the character to move to any adjacent cell to the Vanguard without provoking attacks of opportunity. So this is pretty cool to kind of set things up, so to speak, for your other melee characters by using this ability and then moving them in their position. And then look at this massive bonus here. And this is also unbuffed, by the way. This is just our raw stats, and we're providing a plus 26 damage boost as well as armor penetration. Pretty sweet, and you'll see some stuff in the footage in a minute. All right, then we're going to be further increasing our coercion. And for our next talent for our Vanguard, we picked up the counterattack stance buff that will enhance our defensive stance, which will reduce the penalty we receive when we make those retaliation attacks. But then in additional, these attacks opportunity will deal extra damage based on our toughness bonus. So a nice way to weaponize our beefy HP. Following that with the next common feature, we pick up our heavy armor proficiency finally. Obviously, if you are playing this level by level on your actual campaign, you probably picked this up earlier, but this is when I picked it up now in this build because, again, I was being greedy. And then we increase our fellowship, and then we pick up our next common talent, It Will Not Die, to increase our wounds by half the character's level, rounded up. Following that, we pick up Taunting Opportunity. Whenever the Vanguard hits an enemy with an attack of opportunity, that enemy must make a willpower resistance test, and on a failed test, we taunt them, basically. This is going to be one of the many ways that we can taunt, considering that we are missing some stuff from the warrior since we went the officer side of things. So we're going to need to get as many ways to be able to taunt the enemy the best we can. And really our main source of doing that is going to be by parrying and getting a retaliation attack on them. And attacks of opportunity. All right, so then we are going to keep increasing our coercion and our toughness. And our first ultimate upgrade, I went with the very first option. Until the next turn, the Vanguard cannot die. And until the start of the next turn, all damage suffered by the Vanguard is reduced by toughness bonus. That's not part. The second part's not too important, but the first part, you can't die. Can't say no to that. All right, following that, we're going to pick up Punish the Imprudent. Once per round, when the enemy considers a Vanguard a priority target that enters a cell adjacent to the Vanguard, you'll get a free attack of opportunity against them. Pretty nice. Then we're going to increase our carouse and our toughness. And then for our next ability, I picked up Provocation. The Vanguard forces an enemy in their melee range to immediately attack the Vanguard. All the Vanguard's allies who are wielding a melee weapon, and adjacent to the enemy as well, will make an attack of opportunity. And then the enemy will suffer extra damage from these opportunity attacks, and will also make a penalty to their parry and dodge. So not only will you be able to get free opportunity attacks to your allies, but you also be able to increase their damage from just your fellowship bonus, and that's not even counting the bonus from Follow My Lead. So it's pretty sweet. And then we're going to increase our defensive combat here. While the Vanguard is at least one ally in a 2-cell radius, you'll get even more parry equal to your toughness bonus, or increased by your toughness bonus. All right, following that, we're going to increase our weapon skill so that we can potentially land our actual hits. And then increase our carouse. And then we're going to get the upgrade to the Follow My Lead perk called Offensive Follow. Whenever an ally uses following, that ally gains extra damage against all enemies in a 2-cell radius in the Vanguard. So not only will you be getting the 26% damage from the Follow My Lead, you get an additional 21%. Pretty nice. And then finally, we're going to pick up the Commissar passive. Summary Execution. If the Commissar kills at a target with at all costs, they can use it against once more. Otherwise, you can pick up Duty, or otherwise you can pick up For the Emperor, if you so desire. I really didn't know what else to pick at this point. Honestly, I probably could have picked up the Plasma proficiency since I picked up the Pinnacle of Weaponry here. But you can go with Plasma Weaponry, you can go with Bolter Weaponry. Honestly, there's so many different choices you can go with, but I wanted to go with the Summary Execution, even though it won't happen too often, but in the case that we do manage to kill our target with our at all costs, we can get a free attack. And then further, to round up our Vanguard levels, we're going to go ahead and get the increase to our second ultimate upgrade. Until the start of the Vanguard's next turn, each attack made by the Vanguard makes them a priority target for the enemy hit by that attack. Not too shabby for another source of taunting. All right, moving on to our Exemplar talents. There are plenty of really good options here for the talent from the officer side of things and also from the tank side of things. So really pick whatever you feel is more crucial to your build. And just cater to however you decide you want to play your character. But for this build, I went with Flag Bearer first. All allies within a 2-cell radius will deal extra damage based on your fellowship bonus, and also will receive less damage based on your toughness. So this is going to be really good for this Vanguard officer tank build since we have a high fellowship and a high toughness. And obviously, you don't really want to have this on multiple characters because it does not stack. So this would be like the perfect character for this talent. Following that, we'll pick up the officer talent, Personal Oversight. Whenever the officer targets an ally with an action, an ability, or an attack, that ally's resolve is increased by 1 until the officer's next turn. This effect stacks and is prolonged until the officer's next turn each time it stacks. So obviously, you're playing an officer and you're playing a Vanguard on top of that, so you have plenty of ways to help buff your allies and get this resolve stacking up. And as always, we're going to be keeping on increasing that coercion. Following that, we're going to be able to upgrade our Vanguard talents. Unyielding Resolve, while we're at maximum stacks of our Unyielded Beacon, we'll be just getting a +7 flat resolve. Pretty nice. Alright, following that, we're going to increase our Fellowship, because again, that is our main stat here. And then we'll be picking up Motivation, the Commissar passive. Anytime the Commissar grants additional movement points to an ally character, they get +2 more. Really good to help your melee characters get around on the battlefield, or even your ranged characters too. Movement is always nice. And then we pick up the Air of Authority officer ability here to increase resolve. And then if the target is already under the effect of voice command, they'll get an additional AP. So Air of Authority is really good. So it is, again, I mentioned earlier, it is a neutral buff in terms of it doesn't really care if it's a range or melee, obviously, since Break the Ranks is more steered towards melee and Take the Aim is steered towards range. Whereas Air of Authority doesn't care who it is. Resolve is always nice, and getting that extra AP bonus is always nice too. So it's really up to you if you want to pick this up early. I really enjoy Break the Ranks though. So really it's whatever your preference is. And then we'll increase our coercion. Alright, for our next Exemplar talent, I picked up Lethal Threat. Enemies hit by the character with a melee attack are basically taunted unless they resist it. Really nice, since we don't have many ways to taunt because we don't have that taunting shout from the warrior. So there's just other ways to potentially get more threat on people. And we'll increase our Fellowship, followed by the Officer talent, Lead by Example. Whenever the officer uses 2 officer archetype abilities that do not grant an extra turn in 1 round, the officer gains the Stand Witness effect. And then the next officer archetype ability that does not grant an extra turn will also affect the officer. So really, we're going to need to have another talent here. Whether it's... so you'd have to use Break the Ranks, Air of Authority, and Take Aim on people, and then you can get the third one. So say you use Air of Authority or Take Aim, and then you use Break Ranks, and then you get the buffs of that as well. Or you can do the same thing with Air of Authority. Really, I don't really use this too often. I just wanted to see if I could make it work, but you need to have another ability that is not move, or bring it down. Anyways, following that, we're going to pick up the next Vanguard ability called Force Distraction. It's just a talent. You choose an ally and all enemies nearby will have a penalty to that resistance test equal to your Fellowship, and you'll taunt them. So another way to get a nice taunt. And then we're going to increase our weapon skill so that we can actually hopefully land our melee attacks. And then following that, we're going to pick up Resilient Beacon from Vanguard. Critical will deal less damage to the Vanguard based on your toughness bonus. Really nice to have. And then, to get even more Fellowship, we just picked up the characteristic training to increase our Fellowship, just for that +5 bonus. And then we're going to increase our Carouse, and then pick up the Exemplar talent called Full Attention. Targets that consider the character a priority target deal 40% less damage to the character's allies. Not too shabby to help keep them protected. But there are plenty of other good Exemplar talents as well that could help you be tankier, such as Tough as Steel to get even more health, Flesh Wounds, which will help you regenerate that health. Following that, we get our increase to AP again. And then we'll pick up the Officer talent, Iron Discipline. All allies affected by the officer's abilities will gain a bonus to resistance tests equal to their willpower bonus. It's not, of course, it's not going to be too high since we're not investing in that. However, just by getting buffed by other officers, we can pump that up a little bit. And then we'll increase our Carouse. Pick up Inspiring Speech, which is an upgrade for Air of Authority, which will immediately grant momentum to the target equal to the target's resolve. So if you use this on somebody like Heinrich, who is a Sanctic Psyker, who potentially get their resolve really high, you can help get trigger some ultimates a lot quicker. And then we're going to increase our Medicae here, just because I haven't done it yet. And, better late than never to use that first aid kit, right? All right, following that, we're going to pick up Overwhelming Provocation. If the target of provocation is hit at least by 1 attack of opportunity caused by the provocation, the target will gain 1 stack of fatigue, and it's just like a debuff against the enemy. It's not super critical, but I just figured I wasn't using anything else, so let's go ahead and grab that. And then we start increasing strength to help actually get some damage going when we do land our attacks. So there are some, speaking of the strength, there are some actually other exemplar talents that also could be something for you to consider as well, such as, where is it? Peak Condition. The character will gain a strength bonus equal to the maximum hit points, or their maximum wounds. So after you use something like Tough as Steel, or the It Will Not Die, you'll get a lot more health, and then that in turn will give you more strength to do more damage. Other options would obviously be Eager for Battle to get just flat 2 more AP, which is always nice. Eager Subordinates and Firebrand are also good officer talents to pick up, because Eager Subordinates will allow you to make your characters deal 15% more damage when you give them extra turns, and then Firebrand will also allow you to give them more AP and MP. But I felt like with this build, we wanted to make sure our Commissar is actually tanking and actually surviving hits, so I wanted to make sure we got those exemplar talents to keep them alive more often. All right, and before we move on to the footage of the gameplay footage of this build in action, I can showcase you guys a little bit of some gear that we have. So this is currently in Act 4, not the most optimized gear, but it's still pretty effective, as you'll see in a moment. For our helmet, obviously you can't go wrong with the Commissar's cap. What's a Commissar without their damn hat? This will increase our fellowship by 10, and also grant fellowship bonus equal to critical hit chance to both the wearer and the allies. This is not super critical of a buff and that you need, but hey, if you're not getting critical hit chance from elsewhere, this is not a bad way to get it, since you're not investing talents and such, and you can always just switch this helmet if you feel like you don't need that fellowship bonus, or you have enough crit on your other characters. And then you equip something more tanky on yourself instead. For the armor, obviously we were increasing our coercion by quite a considerable amount, so we're going to take the Solomon Veer's armor. It's probably one of the best armors in the game. You get a good amount of armor here, and then tons of deflection equal to your coercion bonus. Pretty nice. As you can see here, we got a nice juicy 22 deflection, and of course we could have done this a lot higher if this was our main character. So as you can see here, we get some bonuses to coercion. Oops. We get some bonuses to our coercion from using the Corrupted Inferno Pistol, and some other sources as well. Oh, Champion of the Abyss, I think. And also if we were using the Halo device, but we're not using it on the current character. So anyways, yeah. Solomon Veer's armor is really good. For the necklace, I was just trying something out here. Whenever the wearer and allies in the 2 cell radius gain momentum, they'll also get extra hit points. Not too shabby. I just wanted to just test it out. It's not too impactful. Then we have, moving on to our trinkets here, we got the Auto Stimulant. It's just a Vanguard talent. It's just a Vanguard trinket that I wanted to try out. It didn't seem to do too much, but again, we weren't really fighting enemies that applied bleeding, toxin, or burning, and it's just like not something super critical. I probably rate this like a C tier type trinket. Not like very niche, not super crazy. Then we got the Peculiar Trinket here. At the start of the wearer's turn, you'll gain temporary hit points, and then when the wearer's wounds drop to 0, you'll fall prone and gain 10% max wounds as temporary hit points. And then wearer becomes priority target of adjacent enemies. And then while prone, if the wearer has no other allies with more than 0 wounds, they and their allies will die. Luckily, we're not prone, so we'll be always immune to prone. We'll be immune to prone thanks to us being a Forge Bolt character. Then on the wearer's next turn, they regain 30% of their wounds as temporary wounds. And this guy can only affect once per round. I just wanted to try this out as well, and I feel like this is a pretty solid character to do it on. And considering we can't make ourselves fall prone, so we'll just resist the negative sides of this trinket. For the gloves, we just had plus 10 weapon skill and plus 5 strength. Surely there's probably something better out there for us. Again, this is just kind of like leftover gear I didn't end up selling for my reputation stuff, and this is what we had. Now for our weapon, this is a pretty cool one. The Auto-Striking Power Sword. Whenever the wearer successfully parries an attack with a Power Sword, they immediately counterattack. With whichever costs at least AP, so it's probably just going to be your single target. And it also grants plus 30% parry, and then on successful hit with this Power Sword, the enemy will suffer a penalty to their weapon skill. Not too shabby for other ways to get more parries and actual retaliations. Pretty decent sword. And then for the pistol, I goofed up on this build, as you saw as we're leveling up. I didn't actually pick up the plasma proficiencies, so we're just using the anti-vehicle revolver. As for our cape, we're using the Rogue Trader's Cloak that you get very in the beginning of the game. Gain +5 fellowship for every enemy nearby. Pretty solid. And then we have the fencing boots. Whenever the wearer gains, the wearer will gain a 6% parry while using swords. And then whenever the wearer parries the sword, they immediately counterattack, causing attack to become staggered. If the attacker is staggered, the wearer parry is increased by 50% even more. Pretty nice. So we have plenty of ways to get counterattacks to our parry now, thanks to these boots and the sword, and also our defensive stance if we're using it. Otherwise, we could go ahead and use the Enforcer Light Boots. Whenever the wearer parries an attack, they immediately strike back at the attacker, same as the other. But we also will perform a kick to push enemies away. So this could also be a pretty nice defensive option as well. Again, this is a bunch of just leftover gear. Surely there's some other gear out there that might be better suited for the build. Play whatever you feel like is more beneficial to your character and what you have access to. One thing to note, though, if we are going to be leaning more into the intelligence side of things and the Forge World pinnacle of weaponry here, the power sword right here that we are using is also affected by that, and then also if we'd be using plasma or melta, it'd also get benefits from that too. All right, so now that we see the build and some of the items that we can have at our disposal at the moment, let's go ahead and get into some combat. And you can kind of see it in action. It's not going to be the most impressive, but, you know, it's the best we can do at the moment until we get the next patch and the next DLC coming out. So hope you guys enjoy, and let's roll that footage. So this footage was taken from our live stream, and unfortunately my audio is kind of goofed up on it as well, so I apologize for that in advance. But you can kind of get the gist of it. If you guys have any questions of what we're doing, in particular turn orders and such, by all means go ahead and ask away in the comments. But otherwise, you can kind of see that it's not too shabby. It can take some hits, and it does a decent amount of damage in our retaliations. I'm sure once I actually learn the build properly, we could probably figure out the right buff orders and such, so we can actually get the maximum amount of damage we can with our retaliations. And of course, if we were using the two-handed chainsaws as well, we could probably get a lot more damage out of our Vanguard. Just something to consider. Oh my god, I'm just messing up left and right. All right. Let's see, follow my lead. Go ahead and... What? There we go. Here, we'll swap to them. Let's do our defensive stance. Let's do follow my lead again. All right, and well, that is the build, my friends. Hope you guys enjoyed and learned some stuff here. And as I was making this video, of course, Alcat dropped the 1.3 patch the next day after. I did review it a little bit this morning, and it doesn't look like there's anything that's going to affect this build too much, so it's still fairly up to date for 1.3. There might be some new items that they added that I'm going to take a look at to see if any of those will be good candidates for this build. Otherwise, we'll be waiting until the next DLC to update this even further. Hopefully we get some nice goodies out of that. Anyways, I really hope you guys enjoyed this guide. Please like, comment, subscribe for more guides like these, and by all means, comment down below how you prefer to build your Commissar build. Do you do a Warrior Vanguard? Do you do a Warrior Arc Militant? Or do you do an Officer Master Tactician or an Officer Vanguard? By all means, please tell me down below. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video or the next stream. Farewell for now.